Welcome back to the ACOI Resident Lecture Series on Physician Contracts. This is part two, where we're going to discuss compensation and how compensation shows up in a physician employment offer. Part one, if you missed it, was on contract risk. We would encourage you to go back and listen to that one first. However, if you're joining us on this one, I'll give you a little bit of background on who I am and how we interact with ACOI. My name is an attorney. I've been practicing for 15 years and I've helped 10,000 plus physicians negotiate their contracts. I'm also the CEO of Resolve.com, which is a platform designed specifically to help you evaluate your contract, identify risk, help you understand compensation, and get you access to the data that you need. If you're interested in any of those things, we'd encourage you to check out the website, which is below my face here, and also utilize your ACOI member benefit because you do get a discount on those services. So let's get into part two, where we're talking physician compensation. And what I want to start with is this chart and this graph, just showing you what types of compensation you may see in a contract. This certainly is going to vary by employer type. We talked in part one on how private practice is going to be a little bit different than a hospital or a health system or an academic center or a practice owned by private equity, right? Those are the different, kind of players that you're going to see in the market. But by and large, broad brush, these are the categories of compensation that you should be looking for, okay? Almost every contract is going to have a base salary or a guaranteed salary for somewhere between 12 and 36 months. So you should be looking for that. Almost every contract is going to have a productivity bonus attached with that, meaning you're going to be paid based on the number of work RVUs you produce and or the number of collections or gross charges that you're generating for the practice. Again, normal benefits, common benefits that you're going to see from almost every employer: vacation time, CME allowances, kind of the normal health insurances, retirement plans, things like that, okay? Now, as we start to get into other incentives, things like relocation allowances, signing bonuses, those are fairly common. It's very difficult to recruit and retain physicians by and large. Again, broad brush across the country, there's a huge shortage of physicians, and so you should have leverage in this process. It is very, very common to see these things kicked out. And now there are certain markets that you may not run into that. If there's 4 or 5 candidates for the same job, they may not have to be as aggressive with their compensation, offers. But certainly everything in green you should be paying attention to, top right, and should be asking for if it's not there. Now, the 2 blue categories are going to be dependent on your employer type and dependent on the practice. And so you may see quality components or quality bonuses in your compensation, and you also may see compensation for supervising APPs. Now, if there are no APPs in the practice, obviously we're not encouraging you to ask for that. But if that is a possibility in the future that they're adding APPs, this is usually done with either a flat fee, so a dollar amount per APP, $15,000, $20,000 a year per APP that you supervise, that type of thing, or they'll give you credit for their production. Maybe you receive 5 or 10% of their work RVU credits for that supervision and for that time. Okay. Now, on quality, this is a little more broad. You're going to see this from more employers. And what we would encourage you to think about here is whether or not the quality pieces are objective and things that are underneath your control, right? If it's heavily based on maybe patient satisfaction or things that, aren't necessarily always a one-to-one, based on your efforts, we would encourage you to just try to limit the amount of total compensation that's in that bucket. So if your quality bonus is 5% of your compensation, that's probably reasonable. If it approaches anything past 10 or 15%, that you're going to be leaving too much in a subjective category, in our opinion. So just be careful on the quality side. And then the 3 things in orange, and there's certainly other compensation components, and practices get creative at times with what they offer, but you may see stipends while you finish training. You may see retention bonuses for longevity at a practice. You may see student loan forgiveness. These are less common, usually in high demand areas and or practices that have had a hard time recruiting. So again, if your situation calls for that, if you're in one of those types of practices or locations, we would certainly encourage you to ask for anything, and everything that's on this slide. Okay, so once you've got the different categories, I still think that most of your compensation is going to come from your base salary and your production. Okay, we're still very much on a fee-for-service model across the country, and so I want to help you understand how to evaluate the 3 most common payment models and how sometimes we see games being played by employers with that and just what to be careful for. Okay, so we're going to walk through a work RVU column first here on the left. Work RVUs, if you're not familiar with that, every CPT code. Every patient encounter that you have will have a corresponding work RVU value. And the concept is that the employer will total up your production over the course of a year. And if you cross a certain threshold or a certain number of work RVUs that you produce, you'll be paid a bonus. Okay. And so in my example, that threshold is 3,000. It's this middle number. If I can get the mouse to hop up here in your contract, and they're going to pay you $40 per work RVU once you've crossed that threshold. Okay. And it ties into a base salary offer of 200,000. So your job is now to evaluate whether that's a fair offer or not. Let's say you go out and you look at different compensation sources and you say, okay, median for this position is 200,000, so I feel like I'm at fair market value. But we would encourage you to dig a little bit deeper, because if median production is 2,500 work RVUs, that's where you should be asking a question of, why is my contract not lining up with the data points that I'm seeing? And if these numbers are accurate, right, and if there is this 500 work RVU gap, what that means is that your colleagues or your peers are producing 2,500 work RVUs and getting 200,000, and you're being asked to produce 3,000 work RVUs for the same compensation. And if every work RVU is worth $40, that's $40 times 500 is $20,000 a year that you're going to be short in compensation under this model. And you can use that same type of analysis on a collections model or on a billings model. Just for example purposes, we'll walk through the collections. Your contract says you've got to get to 600,000 in collections before you bonus, and once you do, they'll pay you 30% of every dollar that comes in, and they've again tied that to a base salary of 200,000. So in this example, we're going to go out and say that the median's 190, so you're actually in a good position. You're 10,000 ahead of that. However, your peers are only collecting 500,000 to get to that 190. Okay, so you're $100,000 short here, or you're being asked to produce $100,000 more. And if every dollar is worth 30 cents to you, right, you're 30,000 short here. Even though you're 10,000 to the positive in the base analysis, you're still going to be short, right, as opposed to fair market value. And so the ways to solve for this is either in a work RVU model or a collection model, you need to either increase the base, right, to the right level for the production threshold, or you need to decrease the threshold to the appropriate median, or if you feel like there's a lot of volume and these are set appropriately, there's also ways to maybe increase this multiplier so that over time you're going to catch up. And I think that's probably the most risk out of those three options. The cleanest way is to increase the base or decrease the threshold. But those are the levers that you have available to you to push on. And that, again, that same type of analysis can apply to a billings model, and I won't walk you through that right now. But be thinking about, regardless of where I produce, right, I want to be at fair market value. So if I produce at the median, I expect the median. If I produce at the 75th percentile, I would expect to earn 75th percentile money. Okay. Now, where do you go to find that information? I think that's a very logical next question. There's three categories of data, in my opinion. There's one that's called survey data. These are large benchmarking surveys that are released once a year, sourced from employers. They use them for fair market value compliance. So if you've heard things like, we've got to be compliant with Stark, or we've got to be compliant with the IRS, these are the surveys they're utilizing to confirm that. You'll hear acronyms like MGMA, AMGA, Sullivan and Cotter, AAMC. There's others that are out there. The most common is MGMA and Sullivan and Cotter, in our opinion, is what we run into when we're negotiating. And the MGMA data is the one piece that you'll see on our platform, along with this second category, which is the data from your peers and other contracts that are out there. So if you go to Resolve.com, there's a category called Our Data. This is sourced from you, so kind of the other side of the coin. It's on a live stream, and it's real data that's been verified, with documents. It also includes things beyond just comp, like non-competes and tail coverage and all those other value points that may be important to you. And then the third category of data, which I actually think is maybe the most important category, is just having a couple different job offers in the market that you're looking at. The big reason is it gives you leverage. It's also, again, live, it's verified, it's sourced from you, so you're not guessing at who the employer is. But the biggest piece, again, is that it gives you leverage, right? And you're going to know for that market, for your services, for your CV, what people are offering. So get yourself access to all three of these, and I think you'll be in the best position to negotiate and to evaluate your compensation offer. And so hopefully you're going to be asking yourself, what is the median, right? I'm going to go look at this data. This is a chart that shows a little bit of a trick question to you, because all of these numbers are medians, right, for internal medicine. And The reason for that is because when you go to the data sources, there's over 250 different filters. I've listed a handful of them here. So if someone tells you that we're paying you median, I think that you need to trust and verify, right? And make sure you've got access to that information yourself, because they may be sorting by a certain geographic region. They may be sorting by an FTE category or an FQHC status, right? There's different ways to get to a median number, if it's academic or not, how long you've been in practice. And so you really want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples for your situation, to know what's fair, okay? And the data really varies. I'm showing you a quick example here of a difference between what we've seen in contract offers as opposed to what one of the surveys shows for first year medians, and the difference and the percentage in that. And it can be fairly dramatic, right? At times it's almost 20% higher. Some of the reason for that is just because the data is delayed, right? So these surveys that come out once a year are going to be different than what the market is showing for a specialty at that specific time. So again, we think all data is good data. Certainly some data is better. The more recent it is, the more verified it is, right? Things like that matter. But get your hands on as much as you can as you move through that process. Okay, so hopefully now you've watched part one, you understand some of the contract risk pieces. You now know where to go for compensation, you know what to look for and how to analyze a production model. Your next step is going to be, will you negotiate? That's going to be what we talk about in part three. Again, if you have questions on any of this, my email's at the bottom. You can also go to the website and utilize the chat feature, and we will see you next time in part three.